Good afternoon. My name is Scott Maxwell. I'm the Director of Business Development for Focal Point, and I would like to welcome everyone today to our webinar. We've got a pretty good group joining, and some folks are continuing to trickle in. Again, understand in today's world, everybody has a lot on their minds and a lot on their plates, and so I, again, like to thank everyone for taking some time to join us today. Our team has worked hard and prepared a presentation that we're hopeful you'll find very useful as you look ahead to the required SAP upgrades that many of you are facing on the horizon. We're getting started here shortly, but I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. First, you should all have a GoToWebinar dashboard on the side of your screen. You can use that to ask questions throughout the webinar. Just drop them into the questions section of the dashboard. Our presenters today will run roughly 30 minutes, and then we will follow up with roughly a 15-minute Q&A at the end. If there are any specific questions about your organization, again, we're happy to take those offline as well. Secondly, we will be issuing CPEs for the attendees roughly 48 hours after the end of the webinar. In order to qualify for your CPEs, you do need to attend the duration of today's session, and you will need to complete at least 2 of the 3 poll questions that will be asked throughout the presentation. And then lastly, I know we have some folks here who are new to Focal Point, might be your first webinar joining us, so I would like to take a very brief moment to introduce you to who we are. So Focal Point, we are a leading cybersecurity services provider. We're proud to say that we work with many of the Fortune 500 and government agencies. We integrate market-leading consulting, technology integration, and cyber workforce development services to provide end-to-end solutions for security leaders who are looking to future-proof their companies against threats, many of today's changing data protection laws, and the growing cyber workforce shortages. Again, you can learn more about our services, our solutions, and our team at focal-point.com. So before we get started, let me take a quick moment and introduce our speakers for this afternoon, Carrie Bowman and Andrew Meck. So Carrie is a senior manager of our SAP advisory services here at Focal Point. She has more than 10 years experience in SAP security, compliance provisioning, and audit initiatives. She specializes in security role design, customizing segregation of duties role sets for customers, and integrating audit compliance into those initiatives. Carrie will be joined today by Andrew Meck. Andrew is a senior consultant with Focal Point's SAP advisory services practice. For the last 7 years, he's been advising clients on SAP security role design and maintenance, as well as rule set customization and GRC maintenance. He works closely with our clients to identify and act upon process automation opportunities for routine assessments and testing audit controls. Again, we feel privileged to have the opportunity to speak with you today and hope you will gain some insights here to help you manage your upcoming SAP upgrades without creating undue security and compliance headaches. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie and Andrew.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Scott, for that introduction. Welcome to the webinar, Upgrading to S4 HANA with a Security and Compliance Focus. I hope everyone is doing well today, and I know that with current shift to primarily working from home, many projects have been impacted as your teams have had to adjust to meeting and planning sessions being held remotely. So for those of you who have been using this time to continue working towards upgrading to S4 HANA, who are actively supporting current S4 implementations, or even those of you who are maybe in the early stages of considering an upgrade and are interested in seeing some of the big picture implications of these various options, we hope that you will find today's session informative. As we all know, from infrastructure to maintenance, customization possibilities, and vendor selection options, there are multiple considerations for any implementation. And today we'll be focusing on these aspects when viewed through the lens of security and compliance specifically, with an eye to the differences between the various S4 options that we've seen and worked through with clients. We'll be discussing on-premise, also known as on-prem, HANA Enterprise Cloud, or HEC, Single Tenant Edition, STE, and Multi-Tenant Edition, MTE. And with that, we are going to go right into our first CPE question. You should see it appearing on your screen here momentarily. What is your current ERP system? SAP ECC, SAP S4 HANA, considering a new SAP implementation, or other? This is usually interesting to see where everyone is at in their S4 journey and just to see what everyone's dealing with. We're starting to get most of our responses in, it looks like. I'll give it just another moment. We're up to about 70%, so I'll give it just another moment. But like I said, this is an interesting question because we think that this information is applicable no matter where you are in that process. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and we'll take a look at those responses. And as we can see, most of our group today are on SAP ECC, so hopefully you'll find this very informative. For those who are on S4HANA already or on another system, hopefully these can bring some things into your conversations if you are considering making changes. All right. Now that we've seen where everyone is today, I am going to turn it over to Andrew, who will begin taking us through some of the different approaches. Take it away, Andrew.
As Carrie mentioned, we'll be discussing each of these approaches through the lens of infrastructure, customization, maintenance, and vendor interaction. When it comes to infrastructure, S4HANA on-prem is essentially on par with what most of us are accustomed to for ECC. Customers have complete end-to-end control of the system as they host and maintain it on their own servers. Given that level of control, it follows that on-prem also allows the greatest flexibility and customization. Customers are free to develop their own programs and transactions, as well as configuring catalogs in order to best deliver access to their end users. Maintenance is also fully within the control of the customer, allowing them to decide on key decisions for upgrades and transports, as well as what support packs to implement, and perhaps most importantly, when any of these changes should occur. The same goes for vendors. Since ownership is end-to-end, customers are not limited as to what third-party software they can integrate with SAP. Ultimately, the on-prem approach is the closest thing to the traditional ECC environment with which most of us are familiar. As we discuss the three other approaches to implementing S4HANA, you'll see how moving things off-prem and into the cloud can minimize your maintenance needs, but also limit opportunities for customization. Amongst cloud-based approaches, HANA Enterprise Cloud, or HEC, is the most similar option to an on-prem setup. In fact, we often hear it referred to as ECC in the cloud. The main difference between HEC and on-prem have to do with infrastructure and maintenance. The obvious difference being that the customer does not need to maintain their own hardware or internal staff to support the infrastructure. Maintenance is primarily performed by SAP or a combination of SAP and a cloud services provider, such as Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. Like on-prem, S4HANA on HEC is fairly open to third-party vendors. However, our experience thus far is that SAP must approve of these vendors, and this is an approval that's limited by version. One of the GRC vendors we work with has described this as a reactive process, as vendors must reapply after each version is released. Despite this limitation on vendors, it is important to note that HEC offers the greatest customizability of the cloud-based options. And from a security and GRC perspective, it has the same functionality and full customization options that are available on-prem without having to maintain the hardware.
The next option we'll be looking at is what is referred to as the Single Tenant Edition, or STE. This is the first of two SAP-hosted cloud options. This is considered a slimmed-down version of on-prem and HEC. As this is SAP hosted, the customer does not need to maintain their own hardware, and maintenance is performed by SAP. This option does allow for some flexibility in that you have access to all standard APIs, your application programming interfaces. You can create your own APIs as needed for connections to third-party systems, and you can also copy and create custom transactions as needed. There are 4 key limitations that I want to touch on, though. The first being that there is no access to the traditional SAP GUI logon pad. Access is only available through the web UI. So for those of you familiar with Fiori or other portals similar to that, this view will be similar. You log in through a web UI and all functionality is accessed through tiles on the screen. Second, you can't edit existing ABAP transactions or code. This means you cannot edit the core code. So as I mentioned, you can create your own custom transactions and catalogs, though, if you need to, which many of you probably do today in your current systems. Third, if you run any compliance tool that is not SAP GRC, you will want to reach out to your vendor to determine if they have created a connector to work with STE. Is that something they have to specifically do? And then fourth, and what I want to pay particular attention to, is that upgrades are released every 6 months, and the customer must implement these upgrades without exception within 12 months of the upgrade being released. You can select the timing within that 12-month period, but it must be completed, and the customer is responsible for supporting and executing regression testing. Next up, I'll talk through the final option and then move on to a comparison of functionalities across all four to show the big picture view of differences, which I think a lot of you will find interesting. The final option is Multi-Tenant Edition, or MTE. As with single tenant, this is an SAP hosted cloud option, so the customer does not need to maintain their own hardware and maintenance is performed only by SAP. And similarly, there is no access to the traditional SAP GUI logon pad, with access available only through the web UI. And MTE is a fairly significantly slimmed down version of on-prem and HEC, and even the STE option when you compare them. With multi-tenant, you only have access to a whitelisted set of APIs, and you cannot create your own APIs. You also cannot create custom transactions. You can only regroup existing catalogs and create roles from those catalogs. This is really important because MTE does not have the full SAP modules available as the other options do. It just has the core module functionalities that keep access standardized and streamlined to the basic, most common, and standard necessary functions. As with STE, if you run any other compliance tool that's not SAP GRC, you'll want to reach out to your vendor to determine if they work with MTE or can create a connector for you. And lastly, this is very important, upgrades are released every quarter with the multi-tenant option, and the customer must implement these upgrades within 2 weeks of the upgrade being released. But the nice thing about this option is that SAP facilitates all the regression testing for each upgrade, which really decreases the effort required on the company side to provide testers, manage testing scripts, all of that. Now that we've gone through an overview of each of the four options, I'd like to talk you through what I think is a really useful comparison view. So we'll be reviewing the security impacts and showing for different functionalities what each option is capable of. The ability to upgrade at any time, as you can see, pretty straightforward. On-prem and HEC, you have full discretion to upgrade if and when you want. And with ST and MT, you have the timing considerations that I previously mentioned. Is a full landscape available? So meaning dev, QA, production, sandbox. You may have a golden client. With on-prem and HEC, you can define your landscape however you prefer to meet your business requirements. With STE, we say yes with an asterisk because you do have a full landscape, meaning you have dev, QA, and production, but you do not have the option for a sandbox or additional other systems. With MTE, you are limited to only a QA and production environment. So ST and MT may be less robust in a landscape sense, but they do greatly simplify the setup of the environment as well as ongoing maintenance and support costs. They're pretty easy to stand up. The availability of traditional SAP GUI logon pad access, as we mentioned, is limited to on-prem and HEC. With ST and MT, you will be using the web UI. The loss of legacy discrete T-code differentiation. So some of you may be familiar with the SAP Enjoy transactions. And the example here where we've transitioned from using separate transactions for create, change, and display, like MB01, 2, and 3, get replaced by MIGO, which performs all of that functionality within a single T-code. Losing the discrete T-codes in some cases may lead to more transaction duplication, more reliance on authorization object level security. But the goal with S4 is to try to simplify functionalities into fewer groupings, and you'll see this across all four implementation options. Full transport capabilities are available with on-prem and HEC with no exceptions. This is just like ECC operates today. You can create, release, and import transports through your landscape at your discretion. With STE, you do have the 3-tier environment we discussed, and you are able to create transports as needed. The difference is that as SAP supports the environment, you submit a ticket to them and they move transports on your behalf. So a little bit different than usual. And with MTE, transports are handled that same single tenant way with SAP moving your transports when you request them from QA to production. The key difference being that in MTE, some functionality is actually no longer transportable. So a key security related item is the role design. Roles are created in QA, you download them, and then you upload them into the production environment. So this is a change for most security teams because we're used to typically transporting this data. And also for compliance considerations, we need to take into account how we want to document approvals for manual uploads of roles into the production environment, since this no longer follows our typical transport approval workflow. Custom transaction creation capabilities will stay the same across on-prem, HEC, and STE. And then as mentioned, MT does not allow for this level of customization. You will be able to take, as I mentioned, existing catalogs and combine the functionalities into a newly named catalog in multi-tenant. You just can't edit any of the functionalities within the catalog. And then custom catalog creations are again available across on-prem, HEC, and STE. And with MT, you're limited to just grouping existing catalogs, no editing of the catalog functionalities. And this is going to be the same for tiles across all 4 options. Full access to authorization activities. So what many of us think of today as our authorization object field value level security, this functionality remains available across all of our options except for MTE, so that multi-tenant. A few things I do want to call out. In single tenant, as I previously mentioned, we only have the web UI layer of access. So while the view may look a little different from the ABAP stack PFCG view that most of us are familiar with from ECC, in single tenant, through the creation of custom transactions and catalogs, you can adjust the activity functionalities that are available in the design. So you still got that flexibility. However, with MTE, because we can't create any custom transactions or catalogs and can't edit the functionality of them, we are actually limited to only 3 activity options in our roles. We can select between change, display, and help access, basically a checkbox functionality of which combination you want between those 3 activities. PFCG role maintenance. I touched on this in my ST comments just now, but on-prem and HEC will stay the same as before, where you have the typical PFCG role maintenance functionality available to you. And with ST and MTE, because we're operating only on the web UI, role maintenance is performed within that web UI. So for those of you who may have used and are familiar with SAP GRC's role maintenance capabilities, this is a very similar concept. You create a role, select your catalog combinations, you set your authorization values for roles. It's just all within the web UI. And remember with MTE that we'll be downloading and then uploading our roles from QA to production versus transporting with the other 3 options. So what do all these security impacts and considerations add up to in the end? Let's talk about increased testing complexity and cost. So with on-prem and HEC, in comparison to today's ECC environment, as Andrew mentioned, these are very similar to what most of us are used to with ECC, right? On-prem is kind of the equivalent of that, and HEC is ECC in the cloud. The difference is you're adding a layer of complexity due to the customization options, from the custom T-codes, catalog, and tile creation, down to the ability to create custom authorization objects and fields. So when you add a layer like Fiori on top of that, you've just created multiple layers of roles that you have to stack together to provide full access to your users. So when you're supporting testing, when you're troubleshooting, your users have to test the roles for both the ABAP layer, where the SAP GUI logon we're all familiar with today is, and then they also have to test their Fiori access capabilities. This means more work to create test scripts, to perform testing, and to support testing. Because now when we troubleshoot, we have multiple layers and role combinations to identify and correct any issues. So testing efforts apply to new role creation on initial system setup, but also your role maintenance over the life of the system, your regression testing as upgrades and support packs are implemented. So that really flows through the entire life of your system when we talk about testing impacts. So customization gains us a lot of freedom and flexibility to make the system work however the business requires, but there is a literal time and dollar cost to that. With single tenant and multi-tenant only having the web UI layer, we are significantly decreasing the complexity of testing execution and support. With MT especially, because we cannot edit the catalog capabilities, the testing impacts are greatly reduced. Our functionality is very standard. It's provided and pushed out by SAP. And then also remember that with MTE, that multi-tenant option, SAP is fully facilitating and supporting regression testing. So that's another cost savings on your support and maintenance simplification. So I know that was a lot of information. So now we're going to move on to our second CPE question, which is, do you currently have a compliance tool? SAP version 10.1 or earlier, SAP version 12, another tool, examples of ones we've worked with, ERP Maestro, Compliance Now, Control Panel, GRC, Greenlight, or none. And I think this will be interesting to see where everyone sits today, because now that I've talked through the security impacts, our next section is specifically around the GRC tool considerations for the different options. And it looks like we've actually already got over half our votes in, so I'll just give it another moment or two. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And what we can see here is that it looks like we're fairly evenly split between none, another tool, or a version 10.1 or earlier. So I think you will all find the next slides with Andrew very informative. So Andrew, I will turn it over to you to discuss the GRC tools.
All right. No matter which S4 HANA solution you decide to pursue, it is important to consider how your current or planned GRC tool will interface with that approach. If your organization is running SAP GRC 12, then connecting to any instance of S4 will be mostly seamless. There are two specific limitations to keep in mind. First, because of the limited whitelist of APIs available in the multi-tenant edition, even GRC 12 may not deliver the full functionality expected, especially when it comes to tracking usage data. In our experience, the lack of necessary APIs within SAP's whitelist for multi-tenant means that it's not possible to record usage data, whether it be for end users or for the purpose of documenting firefighter activity for emergency access management. While we wouldn't expect it to be a common arrangement, the second limitation we want to point out is that if an organization's S4 HANA system is on-prem, but their GRC 12 system is in the cloud, then a connector would be needed to facilitate workflows between the systems. Similar principles apply to GRC 10.1. Essentially, if the organization's S4 HANA system is on-prem and GRC 10.1 is also on-prem, then everything works just like it does for ECC. However, if GRC 10.1 is on-prem and a cloud-based S4 HANA approach is implemented, then a connector is necessary for workflow integration. Of course, keep in mind that the same limitations I mentioned for GRC 12 also apply for 10.1 and the multi-tenant edition. If an organization is operating GRC 10.0 or prior, it will integrate with S4 HANA on-prem. However, it will not function with any cloud-based approaches to S4. Of course, as Carrie mentioned in our last question, there are also several third-party options for GRC. Based on our experience thus far, third-party GRC software that operates with ECC today also integrates nicely with S4 on-prem and S4 on HEC, which should come as no surprise since these approaches are the most similar to the traditional ECC environment. Because single-tenant edition and multi-tenant edition are both dependent on interacting with specific APIs, we recommend that any organization utilizing one of these alternatives should coordinate with their vendor to clarify the specifics and limitations of integration. Again, no matter how robust the software, API limitations, especially for multi-tenant edition, can limit the functionality of any GRC tool. On that note, let's take a look at some of the specific functionality of GRC and S4 HANA. Because no matter what kind of GRC tool your organization is using, there are some specifics to consider just based on the different S4 HANA approaches. If your GRC tool or connector is relying on customizing APIs, then all approaches except for multi-tenant edition offers the flexibility needed to accommodate those APIs. Multi-tenant's whitelisted APIs may cover some of your needs, but the lack of customization may significantly limit the effectiveness of your GRC tool. Speaking of which, leveraging firefighter IDs for emergency access management within on-prem and HEC S4 systems works just like it does in traditional ECC systems. However, this type of access is not available in multi-tenant edition and may be limited in single-tenant edition environments. If the customer is leveraging single sign-on for their single-tenant or multi-tenant system, then ID-based firefighters aren't really an option. This is due to these approaches not having a traditional SAP GUI. Therefore, the single sign-on prohibits users from logging in with alternative credentials, and the web-based interface for single-tenant and multi-tenant doesn't feature the same emergency access management launchpad that we're familiar with from ECC. On the bright side, emergency access management that involves temporary role assignment does function across all S4 options. All approaches except for multi-tenant edition provide the means for tracking usage. As I've noted before, the most significant shortcoming we've encountered with multi-tenant edition involves lacking APIs for tracking user activity. This can be especially important for tracking any kind of user activity or emergency access management activity, especially from an audit perspective. Lastly, it's important to consider that all of these approaches will require reevaluation and updates of your existing SOD rule set. On-prem and HEC options will require reassessing rules involving old transactions that are no longer supported, and how the authorization objects and values that were related to those eliminated transactions may impact the T codes that remain. These options will also require that services involved in Fiori tiles and catalogs be taken into consideration. For single-tenant and multi-tenant instances, the rules become quite different as the customization of authorizations differ greatly from ECC and the other S4 approaches we've discussed. That being said, there's one more thing that's true of all of these approaches. Regardless of the system you're upgrading or migrating from, an assessment and conversion is necessary for all of these options. In order to make sure that your conversion is a success, it is vital that you consider the appropriate key players in the decision-making process.
In our experience, audit and compliance, IT and security, and key business leadership are all integral voices in making the best decision for a company by working together to bring their expertise and their viewpoints to the table. Our audit and compliance teams have knowledge of where system data is hosted, how data is used and monitored, and especially in the context of approved compliant processes like emergency access and transport management, they have an understanding of the company's policies and audit concerns that help drive identifying which approach is best suited to the company. IT and security provide insight on which options provide the functionalities and capabilities that best meet the needs of end users. Do you have a fairly standardized process in the role design today that could easily transition to a single tenant environment where the customization you need is available, but you'll find a significant cost savings by not needing all the bells and whistles of an on-prem environment? Or are you having to take into account processes that are highly customized and without a significant reorg? Any option less than on-prem or HEC will not meet your functionality needs for your users. IT staff like business analysts, basis, your security team are great resources to provide feedback here. And our key business leadership, if we don't have top-down buy-in, getting a project through to the end with all of the access that's needed and getting it implemented in a timely manner is not going to happen. So our leadership's ability to make those driving decisions on changing processes, determining if that's warranted or wanted, and considering overall cost and maintenance implications really helps to shape a project's goals and scope. So in my experience, it's coordination between all of these groups. It helps lead to a well-planned ERP selection and implementation project. And with that in mind, we will go on to our final CPE question of the webinar. What area of the business do you work in? IT and security, audit and compliance, key business leadership, or other? And as we wait for responses to come in, I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to please submit questions if you have any. We have a good bit of time remaining, and we are happy to answer questions for as much time as we have, as many questions as we get. Okay, we've got just shy of 70% of our votes in. I'll give it just another minute. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share our results. And this is great. We've got a little bit of everyone. So our IT and security teams, I'm sure a lot of technical details we've spoken to you guys are familiar with, and audit and compliance and some business leadership, as well as some other team members. So hopefully you've all found this to be helpful and informative. And to our last slide to wrap up, let's talk about the big final question. What is the best fit for my company? We found that on-premise is usually best for larger companies or companies that have disparate organizational structure or a very customized set of processes. On-prem is more expensive due to the added complexity, maintenance, and infrastructure costs that you're supporting, but it does provide you with that full-fledged ownership and flexibility that we know many companies prefer. HEC is similar to on-prem. It's going to give you full flexibility and capabilities. The main decision here is if you would like SAP or a third-party vendor to host your cloud system. Single tenant, we found, is usually a fit for smaller companies with a lower user count who are looking to maintain some flexibility with the option to create custom functionalities when needed, but they're really seeking to benefit from a fairly standardized approach where they can capitalize on the simplified setup and the SAP-supported infrastructure and maintenance. And then multi-tenant is, again, we found best suited to smaller companies with a lower user count for whom basic standardized access will meet their needs and allow them to take full advantage of the cost savings and a full SAP infrastructure support model. And with that, this wraps up our final slide of the presentation. I really hope everyone found this helpful and informative. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Scott, who will let us know if we have any questions submitted.
Wonderful. Well, again, appreciate the content. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions posed. I'm going to summarize. We got a couple questions that were basically all kind of asking the same thing, and you touched on it here in the last slide. But again, I think it's worth maybe kind of maybe a little more discussion on. Basically, the questions are all around the fact that it's pretty clear that MTE is pretty limited. Why would an organization choose this option other than to have a lower total cost of ownership?
Yeah, so as mentioned, MTE is a significant cost savings when you're looking at implementing. The stand-up is very quick because SAP has it, so standing up the system to get your initial access in there is pretty quick. The other thing I would say is for companies that are looking to avoid future customizations, they know they need your basic standard core functionalities. They do not want to customize or have the option there. I think a lot of us know when the option to customize is there, we can sometimes go down that path and we end up with a highly customized system because we've just gotten away from using the standardized processes. So it'd really be for a company that knows exactly what they're using SAP for. It's a very limited, specific set of functionalities that they need, and they don't need or want that customization capability. They just want a standardized system they can set up, use, it's supported, and they get to benefit the cost savings by using it. So that's where we kind of see MTE being a solid option for companies.
Okay. Staying in that vein, another question is, based on our experience, what % of customers do we see choosing MTE or STE? What's kind of the breakdown that we see customers going with?
Between the two or between all four?
The question was specifically between the two.
Okay. So what I would say, so single tenant is actually the newest option of these. So SAP basically introduced multi-tenant as this big cost savings option and offered it to customers. And they have had success with different customers implementing this. But then when they had some customers from specific industries who tried to implement MTE, they found that they were missing, as I mentioned, it doesn't have the full set of modules. It's got your core basic modules. And for some industries, based on especially like your shipping needs and things like that, MTE is just not sufficient for what they need to perform. They need more module capabilities, and they also had just enough processes that were customized that they couldn't standardize fully to that multi-tenant option. So SAP just came out with the single tenant option a few months back. It's fairly new. And so this is single tenant is just now being made available, and it's really an option for customers who wanted to go to MTE. They wanted that standardization. They wanted that simplification, SAP supporting everything, but they were just a little too customized or had just a little bit broader modules that were needed that wouldn't fit into that multi-tenant possibility. So single tenant is the option for them now.
Okay. Can you expand a little bit about basis admin activities in STE? What's available?
Yes. So in STE, as I mentioned, SAP supports it in the sense of, they're going to move your transports for you, but we do still have to create the transports. And you are still setting up different configurations and settings within the tool. So you do still have to set up your data and everything else. You're just now coordinating with SAP to do it because they own the infrastructure and instance. So there are still basis functionalities that need to be performed. With multi-tenant, it's significantly less because SAP is even managing your regression testing and pushing the support packs to you and things. So single tenant, you're still going to need basis support for whenever you're doing those upgrades, because as I mentioned, you have to do them within a 12-month period. So twice a year, they send out updates. You have to do them within 12 months. You're going to need your basis support team for implementing those and supporting them.
Okay. How can we include custom transactions in STE without PFCG role maintenance in STE?
Yeah. So if any of you've used Fiori, think of it similar to that. You're thinking of catalogs. So the new catalogs that come in the Fiori app library are what are used. So when you're creating those, your custom transactions, your custom catalogs, that's where you're creating them. You are adding in your objects and your functionalities into those catalogs as you create them within single tenant. Multi-tenant, that's not an option, but in single tenant it is.
Excellent. And then understanding that MTE is a SaaS service, is it kind of fair to look at STE is a SaaS service but with a private cloud? Can you kind of expand on the difference between those two?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. It is a SaaS service because it is hosted by SAP, because they have ownership of all of it. But you do have more flexibility with your data. So it is a single instance, it is just yours, and only your data is hosted within that single tenant edition. Within multi-tenant, because it's multi-tenant, that's why you don't have access to any of the layers, the about stack layers beneath your web UI, because there are other, you're all on one application, right? Now you're obviously only accessing your web UI, but you can't access anything behind the scenes because all the other company data is hosted in there together. So STE is your stand-up single alone instance that's yours, but it is still SAP hosted.
Okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Yep. So a couple more here. What do you think we can squeeze in? So how much does my security design have to change to accommodate the various S4 choices?
Andrew, do you want to take this one?
Sure. With the 4 approaches, it pretty much boils down to whether or not you've got the traditional GUI or the web interface. If you're doing on-prem or HEC, then you're still maintaining things in PFCG. It's kind of just same stuff, different day for using PFCG to maintain. So you got to take the same considerations that you might do for a traditional ECC upgrade. You're going to look at what transactions are going away, what they're being replaced with, new authorization objects that you may need to secure. And don't get me wrong, it's not something you can just breeze through, but it's not a daunting task either. If you're already using ECC and you've done an upgrade before, then that kind of upgrade should feel pretty familiar. For single tenant and multi-tenant, security design is going to have to change quite a bit more because there's just a different approach in how the roles are maintained, right? You're doing it all through this web UI system. For ST and NT, it's more of a matter of figuring out how you translate your existing design to the tiles that are available in those systems. NT, it's going to be a lot more significant because you have that limited core catalogs available in the first place. So if you're looking at changing things over to MTE and you're concerned about your existing security design, you're going to need to coordinate a lot with the business just to figure out if the current business functionalities that you're carrying on, your current processes, can fit into what's available for the multi-tenant, or if they can even adapt it. Can we change what we're currently doing to fit this less expensive system? But I think those are the major things that you need to take into consideration for changes needed for your security design.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are coming here to a wrap. So again, I think that's covered most of the questions. So if you do have any questions that you weren't able to pose, or if you would like to talk with our experts, of course, we are always willing and able to do so. You can either reach us through our website, or I believe at the bottom of the screen you should see our info at focal-point.com. So again, we do ask you to reach out. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. As a reminder, we will be sending a link to the recorded version to the webinar to everyone tomorrow. Again, appreciate your time. Hope you have a great rest of the day and a safe and happy Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.